Hey, welcome back to Defiance of Silence, a Sacred Witness podcast. I'm Val, your host. Today, we're stepping into a conversation that many people never knew existed. When someone experiences a sexual assault, child abuse, domestic violence, human trafficking, or any other violent crime, there are often healthcare professionals quietly waiting on the other side of that moment, not to investigate and not to judge, but to care. So today's guests are forensic nurses, clinicians, professionals who stand beside people on some of their hardest days in their lives. Many people associate forensic nursing with evidence collection, working with the police, etc. But what you're going to hear today is that work like this is first and foremost about nursing, about presence, advocacy, healing, helping people begin to reclaim a sense of safety after trauma. We're also going to talk very honestly and open about what it costs to do this work, about compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, moral injury, faith and resilience, and the importance of caring for those who spend their lives caring for others. So before we begin, I would like to invite you to take a moment to arrive. If you're in a place where it's safe to do so, let your shoulders soften, relax your jaw, take a slow breath in, and an even slower breath out. Notice your feet touching the floor or the chair supporting your body. Notice that in this moment that you are here and you are safe, and you do not have to carry every story that you hear today. You only have to witness it. So here's my conversation with Rachael, Stacey, and Nancy. Welcome, ladies. Thank you for being here today.
I'm very excited to be here.
I'm really excited that you guys are here too. So one thing I want to say is that I am honored to be in the presence of so many forensic nurse brains and talent and all these things right here in front of me. So I'm a little bit fangirling right now that you're all here. I've been wanting to have this conversation since the birth of this podcast, and it's something that I didn't know if it was ever going to come through. So I'm super, super excited. And just to give our listeners just an idea kind of who you guys are and how we got here, I would love for you just to introduce yourselves and let us know who you are and how you got into forensic nursing and what you're doing now. And that would be really awesome. Stacey, you want to kick us off?
I sure will. I'm Stacey Henley, and I'm a pediatric forensic nurse. I started out in many years ago in the NICU. I was doing the NICU for about a little over a year, and I just decided I needed something different. And I've done many things. I've done pediatric oncology. I've done home health, pediatric home, all in pediatrics, home health, and then urgent care emergency department. And then from there, when I was doing my graduate work, I did my project through the care team, which is the the specialist that the department that specializes in child abuse. And that's where I decided this is my place. I learned so much more about it and learned about myself, and I decided I wanted to do forensic nursing. And I've been a forensic nurse for 13 years.
That's a long time. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you so much. Rachael.
Yes. So I have been a nurse for 16 years, and I have been practicing in forensics since 2020. Um, so less time than our other friends on the panel, but I have had the privilege of collaborating with them and learning from them throughout my time working in forensics. Um, Forensics was something that early on in my nursing career, like I started off in postpartum, I've done hospice, some home, pediatrics. And back then, it was something I was interested in, but there was not a training program near me. So it wasn't until I actually moved to labor and delivery, the place where I am now, and some of my colleagues in that unit were forensic nurses, that I was like, okay, here's my opportunity to learn and see if this is a good fit for me. I'm a secondary survivor, so the challenges our patients face are near and dear to my heart. And I just wanted to be someone who could help them in a way that I wish my survivor had been helped. And it has been hard, but also so incredibly rewarding um, to be able to work with forensic patients.
Thank you, Rachel. And for those of you that have been listening from the beginning, you may recall hearing Rachel in a previous episode. So I highly encourage you to go back and listen to her story if you have not. And she talks a lot about that secondary survivorship and what that looks like, because there's not a lot of space for those voices either. So I'm real appreciative of you, Rachel. Thank you, Miss Nancy.
Hello. I was working my first nursing job back in Iowa in the 90s on a medical psychiatry inpatient unit. And there is where I really learned that there is this very strong intersection between mental well being and trauma. And I saw it in my patients, not knowing that there was a whole discipline about this issue. About 5 years into that, we were having a nurse continuing education day, and the coordinator of the forensic nursing program, at that time we just called it sexual assault nursing, was talking about that role, and I just was aghast. I was like, "This is the most amazing thing I've ever heard of. I need to do this." I mean, I just felt pulled from the mental health nurse perspective to apply my skills towards working with a population that had experienced acute trauma. So I couldn't call her until a couple of days later, and I was so worried that I wasn't going to get in because everybody, all the 500 nurses at that training were going to want to do it. And I called her and I said, "Do you still have space?" And she said, "You're the only person that's called."
Oh yeah, I figured that's going to be the case. My
That's what I
goodness.
knew, that this was for me,
Yeah.
and I've stuck with it ever since through, practice, always as an on-call because I wanted to pursue a doctorate, and, I did go in and get a PhD so that I could learn more about how to implement interventions and evaluate them to ensure the best outcomes, so I've been skipping around between, academic work, research, and always keeping some clinical component because that's what really feeds my passion for this work.
Thank you for that passion and thank you for sharing that with us. I had a feeling you were going to say that you were the only one because I think, and we can just start off with that, the challenges of forensic nursing and staffing. And are there enough of us? Why are they leaving the field? Who comes into this field? Like this topic is so wide and broad. And I believe it was you, Nancy, that mentioned when we were talking pre show via email about the loss of forensic nurses through, what's happening. There's a history a lot of times for those of us, myself included, that have a history of trauma that we end up in this work. And then surprise, we get in this work and then some of us are like, this is not for me. I can't do it. There's different paths you can take. Would you share a little bit about your take on that and what you think this looks like for the future of forensic nursing?
Sure, especially since now my primary role is to prepare nurses to be sexual assault nurse examiners and forensic nurses more broadly. So I do see a lot of what brings people in, what are the motivations for that. And people come from so many different places that lead them to this work, and it's all beautiful. There's people who are really excited and interested in the forensic piece. There are people who are survivors, like you mentioned, and so they really want to give back and make the experience better for others. There are people who see it from the perspective, I think, that I did, in that I know there's just more that we could be doing. I want to learn how to do this better. How do we do this better? We want people to thrive and be healthy. Just so many different pathways. And then in terms of sustainability, yeah, attrition is a real thing. I mean, Stacey and Rachel see that, in their program leadership, how that ever revolving door. We, with our SANE education program here in this large DFW metroplex, we have 12 SANE programs, and the coordinators have told us, don't stop creating more nurses. Like there will never be enough because yes, it's hard work. People leave the work and they have very valid reasons to do so. So we need to keep building that capacity and supporting the capacity.
Yeah, because I mean, you don't have practitioners if their mental health is no good. Like what good are we if we aren't in tune with
So,
ourselves
so
and our
true.
own healing journeys? And Um, I know it's extremely challenging to overcome that in any nursing field. There's shortages everywhere, but particularly with forensic nursing. I'm curious if there's a like a difference in whether the pediatric population, because I know a lot of programs practice differently. Some of them don't have pediatric programs, and some do. So, Stacy, in your experience, have you found um, it's more difficult to keep pediatric SANE nurses, or is it about the same?
I would imagine it's pretty similar. I think you have to know if you can do pediatrics, first of all, or if you can do adults, first of all, and then you have to know if you can bear the forensic part. And so it's a combination of the two. I know, for instance, for myself, adults, I just cannot do. And some people say, "Oh, I just could never do pediatrics." And I'm just grateful that we have each other, so we don't have to cross that bridge if we don't want to.
Exactly, exactly. And Rachel, do you mind briefly maybe explain for somebody who's never heard of a forensic nurse or doesn't know what a SANE is? We're saying all these things and we're nurses and we're speaking the same language, but I think some of the listeners might maybe not know what we're saying. Do you mind doing a brief overview of that for us?
Yeah, no, I don't mind at all. So, um, the term forensic nurse really encompasses all that we can do, but a lot of people are going to be more familiar with sexual assault nurse examiners. Um, and back when this field really started to get off the ground, a lot of the work was in sexual assault. Um, or caring for patients, adults who had experienced sexual assault. And as nurses have been caring for these patients, they're realizing, okay, there are so many more people and circumstances in which we can really make an impact. So that includes seeing patients who experience domestic violence or physical assault. Um, we can take care of child abuse victims, elder abuse, human trafficking. And there are even forensic nurses who can work in death investigation, or maybe they work in their ER collecting evidence when there are gunshot wounds or stabbings and things like that. So essentially, a forensic nurse is someone who cares for an individual who has experienced a crime. The way I explain it to my patients is I am here to take care of anybody who has had something happen to their body. And if it's a kiddo, I add their feelings. Because sometimes, especially with the kids, they really don't understand what's going on. And sometimes they know that whatever happened to them they didn't like. And sometimes they have no idea that what happened to them was not appropriate. And so, um, our primary role is really making sure the medical needs of that patient are met. But then, because we try to look really holistically at the patient, we're also doing things like making sure they have the appropriate resources going forward. Do they need follow up treatment or a second evaluation to make sure they're healing well? Maybe they need certain medications to prevent an STI or to address another issue that might be going on. Um, and then additionally, we are trained to be able to collect evidence if that person, the adults, choose to file with law enforcement and elect to have that evidence collected. Now, it's a little bit different with kiddos because anyone 17 and under, we are in the state of Texas, where we reside, and in most other states, you're required by law to let law enforcement know if there has been abuse to a child. So, like Stacey said, her program, they just do kids, and there are programs who just do adults. There are programs who, right when they're getting off the ground, they only see sexual assault victims. And then there are programs who see all sorts of different patients from different circumstances. So I've been blessed to learn in a program where we take care of both adults and kids, and we see sexual assault, domestic violence, human trafficking, elder abuse, child abuse. And it has been really amazing to learn how to care for patients in all of those different circumstances.
That was very well said. Do you think, and any of you can answer this, do you think that there's a misconception of what forensic nurses do out there? And what have you heard? I'm just curious.
I think that there are people who think we work for law enforcement and that our number one goal is to collect evidence and really um, provide that evidence for um, pursuing the perpetrator through the court system. Um, but that is not always the case. We do not work for law enforcement. We work independently. And everything that we do in an exam is for the purpose of medical diagnosis and treatment. And that's going to be our number one goal is to making sure that the physical, emotional, holistic medical needs for that patient are met. Now, if they choose for us to collect evidence and report to law enforcement, we can assist with that. We also can testify in court if things go that way. But the vast majority of patients, um, honestly, even if they choose to report, will not see the inside of a courtroom where their perpetrator is being prosecuted. And so rather than that being our focus, we are looking at what can we do to help this patient in this acute trauma situation and help them start their healing journey, whatever that looks like. And that's going to look different for every single patient.
And as far as assisting them, that's where advocacy comes in. So I know we are only able to do so much. They can't call us when they're done, like, "Hey, Val, I have a question about this," or "I'm really struggling with this," because I collected their evidence, but that's as far as it goes. And that's part of my goal when I pitch to them, like, "Do you want me to call an advocate?" So, um, what do you think the role looks like in the future, um, when we can get more advocacy on board and get more nurses on board and get these patients more supported? Like, what else do we need to continue to do that? I know, Miss Nancy, you are developing a intimate partner violence clinic, right? Did I read that correctly? So
Yes.
that's part of this too. What are your thoughts on that?
Personally, I think that you should never provide a medical forensic exam without an advocate present, or at least that advocate presenting to the patient themselves and describing their role rather than asking if they would like to have an advocate because A, they don't know what an advocate is, and B, they oftentimes are very selfless and don't want to have somebody called in. They don't want to bother somebody, especially it's the middle of the night. So the best model is if the advocacy is just called at the same time that the forensic nurse is called. And then if I get there before the advocate, I always respect and give the advocate a little bit of time alone with the patient. There are things the patient might want to share with an advocate, for example, that they don't want to necessarily share in a medical forensic exam, or concerns they have before they begin. And I want them to have that opportunity. I know that I have a very special role, but it's a much more delineated role, like you said. I'm there with them. I spend a very sacred few hours with them. And then, yes, the hard work is really what the advocates do. And I know that and I respect that. They're the ones that are going to take that survivor through the rest of that journey, the legal journey, if they pursue that route, the healing journey. And I play a very small but important role in that.
Yeah. So, what actually is an advocate? We'll start with that.
An advocate is somebody, especially, well, in Texas, it's probably going to be different everywhere, but Texas has a very specified role for advocates that if they're going to do a hospital accompaniment, they have to have a 40-hour state mandated training that's very specific to their content and curriculum. And so, what those advocates do then, in addition to providing counseling and support to survivors, even if they have an exam or not, or report or not, and whether it's an acute event or not, they do what's called a hospital accompaniment. It's just, or a medical accompaniment if it's a community based program or a child advocacy center. They respond and they are basically there to provide that patient with support and resources to help them to really be focused on what that survivor needs. A lot of times the way I describe it is I'm also there to support emotional needs. Sometimes I have to get really focused on documentation, the technicalities of, the evidence collection, and this advocate is here just for you. And this advocate has confidential privileges. You can say anything you want to this advocate. They're not going to tell it to anybody else. My role is to document what you say and to collect evidence. And this advocate is really here just to focus on you. That's how I explain it. I don't know. I think probably Rachel and Stacey can add things to that.
Sure. I have had the privilege of helping do some training for advocates in our community. So, as part of that 45 hours that Nancy talked about, some of that includes meeting with the forensic nurses so they understand our role and where to come when they show up at the ER and things like that. Some real practical logistics things. But Nancy brings up a good point, and it's something that whenever I'm teaching advocates, I make sure to point out to them is that their role is so important. And I agree with Nancy that they really are going to be the primary people who make the biggest impact potentially on this patient. Because even though a patient comes to me for medical care, even if they go to law enforcement, make a report, and that makes them feel safer, um, we are still asking for something for the patient. Law enforcement has them share their story, and um, we do that same thing. So when a patient tells us what occurred, it really guides our physical exam. And so I always keep in mind that yes, they're coming to me and my intention is to help, but they can still have additional trauma because they have to go through this story. And I'm a stranger and a medical professional, but I'm asking them to let me look at their body and make sure that they're okay. And so while it has a good intention, it is still requiring the patient to sacrifice something. And it can be very difficult when they've already been through so much. And so it really is that advocate that is there to give to them rather than take. And that's one of the things that I find really amazing about the role of advocacy with the care of these patients.
And Stacey, is there a different role for advocates that are taking care of pediatric patients?
Yeah, I think the main thing would be that we have the parent element or the caregiver element with the pediatric population. And whether this happened recently or whether the abuse happened a long time ago, it's usually a crisis to the parent because they just found out. And so many times they are spinning and require crisis intervention. And it's a very different look from what the child is dealing with. The child's like, not that it's not to minimize what happened, but they're like, yeah, this has been happening. Like, this isn't new. And for the parent, it's new. So you have to kind of walk both, both walks with that. And I think that it's helpful for the advocate to give the parent the space to be able to have their crisis moment because the parent's really supposed to be the strong one, right? But they can't be because they're dealing with what happened to their child and they're struggling mightily. And so they try to give the parent the space where they can do what they need to do to process and cope with it, and then to regain their composure and be the strong one, and then give the child the space as well.
Yeah, that's no small task for sure. I get a lump in my throat just thinking about that. 'Cause I've not had to be a parent that has walked through that. It's something like you said, you're either able to do pediatrics or not, and for me, that is just something that I have a real hard time with, for many reasons, but on that topic, we'll just kind of segue into that as far as and I'll start with you, Stacey. You deal with children and again, the parents also is we can't forget that part, but how do you process what you're seeing and hearing, and how do you take care of yourself through that process? And what does that look like when you go home at the end of the day?
Well, I will just be transparent and say that I'm not always very good at that. I tend to just keep piling it on, piling it on. I stack things up, and then, you think about a bunch of mattresses or a bunch of books or something, and then finally you stack one too many and then it topples. And that's kind of what happens with me. And I'm like, why am I crying over this certain thing? It's nothing. It's different. It's like I've heard this story, you know, 50 times this month, and why now? And it's just because it's stacked too high. And I've got to unload that stack before I can take on more. And I've got a great base with my family who is so supportive, and they ground me and they let me be me. They don't try to change it because they don't try to fight me. And I'm grateful for that because I can just be who I need to be so that I can be there for my patients and families. Very, very grateful for that. But I also have a faith that I hold on to, and that is what supports me. I also fight with it a lot. I seem to my faith looks different from other people's faiths, I think, because they haven't seen what I've seen. They haven't heard what I've heard, and they have no concept. And so I think that is hard or different for me to be able to grapple with that. And I think I wrestle that all the time, but I still wrestle. I keep wrestling and I keep holding on. But I think, one of the things that I've found that helps me the most to process or to be able to compartmentalize and process what I deal with every day is my tribe. And my tribe, I have different tribes, but one of my tribes is Rachel's in my tribe, and Nancy Downing's in my tribe, and we just support each other. And it's a non-judgmental, it's a acknowledging, it's accepting, and we call each other out when we need to, but it's not oh my gosh, did you see how Nancy just screwed up? No. It's like, hey, Nancy, we all screw up. Let me help you. Let me help you out of this one. Let me give you a hand. And they've done that to me. They're like, hey, don't worry about it. You had a rough night, or you had a whatever. We're going to pull you through it. So that tribe has been really instrumental to me to being able to continue to do this work.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I love that you mentioned that, have to wrestle with your faith. That's something that I think is like a hidden cost of this. And I'm so glad that you went there because that's something that I was gonna bring up anyways, was, you know, this profession costs you something, you know, personally, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, all of the things, no matter where you fall on in your belief system, it costs you something because we're seeing like, terrible things, and it is hard. I that was one of the first things that I noticed about myself was, like, I walked away after 1 or 2 patients going like, "Mm, I don't know how this is, like, how is this okay?" Like, no like, if there's such a loving God, how is this, and I think that's, like, the common thing that you wrestle with anything that you see, and I've heard it from first responders too, like, you see so much, um so many tragic things, but you see some beautiful things too. And um, I think that being able to have this honest conversation about that does make us feel less alone. And if somebody's listening to this that's like, yeah, this is a struggle for me too, like that vicarious trauma, that secondary, it didn't happen to you, but you're carrying it as though it did. Rachel, how do you release those things when it gets too heavy?
Yeah, I think that is a question that every person's in healthcare, but especially in forensic nursing or a place where you are exposed to trauma has to ask themselves, has to find their thing that's gonna work for them because that's gonna be as individual as, there are people so many different ways. For me, I came into forensic nursing having 5 years of hospice experience, and I worked in an inpatient facility, so we had a lot of patients at one time, and it was through that work that I really, first of all, had like a faith crisis. About 3 months in, and when just like y'all are talking about, like, "Wait a second, how can this exist in the world, these terrible things and the suffering that people endure?" But it was through that that I learned to really hold this lament with an open hand and still find moments of joy, and to really reframe it in my mind of, I'm not always gonna be able to prevent, and I'm not always gonna be able to, quote, unquote, "fix." But can I make something better in this little corner of the world for this one patient? And to really learn to let that be enough. 'Cause I would love to fix it. I would love to, you know, not have there not be a reason for forensic nurses. But I know that's not the world we live in. And these patients need somebody. So can I reframe it instead of trying to fix everything? Can I improve one experience for this patient? Um, and so a lot of that carried over into my work in forensics. And I'm so thankful for that prior experience because it really is what gave me that foundation I needed to work in forensics and to make it sustainable. I'm like Stacey. There are times when I don't carry it well. Um, and then there are times when I seem to do better. But for me, um, that includes seeing a therapist at least once a month. Even if I'm just sitting there and she's listening to me talk and debrief, that's great. Um, Also, like Stacey said, the tribe of forensic nurses, like we are there for one another, not just in my program, but in the larger community. I know that any one of us could call the other and be like, "Ah, I need to talk through this, or you have expertise in this area. Can you help me think through this?" And we would be like, absolutely. So there is something really powerful in finding, colleagues to kind of walk alongside you. And then just a little bit more practically, I cuss a lot in our debrief sessions. So obviously not in front of the patient, but if I'm in case review once a month with my team, I just sit in the back and cuss a whole lot, and they know to expect that from me. That helps release some things. Um, so for me, it's a conglomeration of things, the therapy, the working with the tribe, the cussing, the leaning on my faith, and really just trying almost like a mantra, like, "Okay, I can't fix it all, and I cannot rid the world of all of this suffering, but can I make a difference in one small way in my little corner of the world?" Um, and learning to let that be enough.
And it is enough, and it is enough, but I beat myself up like, "Oh, I should have been able to do more." But listen, we can't carry the suffering of the world, like, we just can't do it. So we're not God and we're not superhuman, like, the human aspect of this journey is real. So, Nancy, for you, do you see I mean, you educate forensic nurses coming in, and I'm sure you see things on the back end too. Like, is there a difference between like being burned out or having compassion fatigue versus very vicarious trauma or moral injury? Or are they all kind of the same? Like, how do we know it's changing us? How do we know when maybe we need to take a break?
Gosh, this is such a great point of discussion and one that I'm so glad has become much more of a conversation in the last few years. So I think when we started this work, or when our forebears started the work in the 70s, it was very, warrior focused. Like we needed to go in there and fix some really big systemic issues that around this care. And then now that we've established this profession, we are turning it back onto ourselves to ensure that the people doing this work are sustained. The cumulative stress is so real. I do think what Stacy mentioned, if you are in a busy program, working with children especially, you are going to see a lot more accumulated stress. So I think the compassion fatigue, the burnout is strongly correlated with the level of exposure. In my own practice, I've had the luxury of only working as a PRN nurse. So I have time to decompress between cases. So I never reached that level of burnout. But I can see with accumulation that would be more salient. The way we address it in our education now is to be very intentional about how we build relationship into what we do. So, all of our programming, all our educational programming is in person because that gives us the opportunity to model what relational practice is. And we teach self regulation and we model co regulation throughout all our didactic, our simulation, our precepting. We develop a community of practice and not we've trained you, you're one of, you're an N of one, you're going out into the world and you're doing your thing. We keep those relationships front and center. And that really has been the big sustainer. Find a program where you offer each other grace. Like Stacey said, we all mess up. We don't expect it to be perfect. I've been in several different programs. I've been in some in which you were expected to be perfect, and that'll lead to burnout faster than anything else because we cannot be perfect. So that grace is so important.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
One of the things about forensic nursing is that we're taught to be non-judgmental. We can't if we start judging what is being said, we're gonna go down a path of bias, and we're not gonna get the real information, the correct information. We're gonna presume the information. So I think being non-judgmental or practicing to be non-judgmental helps us with each other as forensic nurses to be non-judgmental with each other.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's a powerful statement. Because I can tell you as a noob, I've had some conversations and some things come up, and it's like I've had to go both ways where I've gotten a lot of grace and like, here's why this is a problem, and let's help you walk through this versus why did you do that? It shouldn't have been like that. I told you to do this. And I'm just being transparent. I've had both experiences and it didn't feel good, So I could see how with having that over and over, you could end up being completely burned out, and not because of the patient load, not because of that. It's because of the external pressure being put to perform a certain way. So I appreciate your perspective on that, Nancy. That's really powerful, and I hope that people will hear this and not think that that's how it is everywhere, but with any job, anything, you're gonna have both sides, but it's up to us, especially as nurses, to be responsible for ourselves and learn how to regulate and co-regulate with each other, and we can also model that for our patients as well, so that we're practicing that all the time, not just in that moment with the patient, like with each other, and like you said, I love how you said that you can model that as leaders. I think that's fantastic, and there's a lot to be learned from just watching somebody navigate this career path, And I want to ask each of you, is there a certain thing that you should be looking for? Maybe if you are working in this field and you're, working with each other, is there something that we should be looking at in each other that would maybe say, like, hey, are you okay? Do we need to pull back? I mean, what are the things that we would look for?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question because even in your most supportive programs, there's going to, because we're human, there's going to be things that come up that don't work well or start to trend that way, right? That can eat away at morale and leave people not feeling as supportive or as supported as they feel like they need to find sustainability in this work. Um, I think if just like Stacey talked about, we are trained to be non-judgmental with our patients. I don't know that we always give ourselves that same grace. Um, but I feel like it's twofold in that one, as far as individual responsibility, I need to learn to say no, right? So, and I think this is probably true across the healthcare field. We are people who get into this work because we want to help, we want to make an impact. And a lot of us have a hard time saying no because we want to be there for our colleagues and our patients in every instance. But I did do forensic work full time for about a year. And when I would reach the point where, okay, I have reviewed 10, maybe 15 charts where I am going through these stories of these patients, I had to learn to say, "That's enough for today." Like, "Okay, today, maybe I can get through those 10. Maybe the next time I'm doing case review, I can only get through 5." And I need to say, "Okay, no, I'm gonna set this aside. I'm gonna give my brain and my body, which is responding to the trauma that I'm reading, a break." And I think we can do that collectively for each other by always trying to keep in mind we're human, to really seek to see the humanity in each other. So instead of, well, why did you do it this way? Or maybe a colleague, there's seems to be a pattern emerging rather than being like, well, why are you doing it like that? Just really going back to the humanity. How are you? How can I support you? What's going on? Maybe there's something at home. Maybe there's something at their full-time job if they're working PRN that is making this difficult. Um, I think if I can keep the humanity of my colleagues in the forefront of my mind, it makes me ask different questions. And I'm more likely to come from that non-judgmental place when I'm seeking the humanity in the colleagues around me.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you.
I think that we have to look for changes in behaviors. I think that's probably the biggest thing is if you see someone who's normally just doing the usual day to day, very happy or at least pleasant, and then all of a sudden they get snappy, there's something going on. And then you have to say, hey, are you okay? Step back. And that, if you think about what we do physically, also, when we're with a patient for hours and hours and hours, and it could be way past your time to clock out, and you're still here and it's in the middle of the night, you haven't slept. Maybe it's just a simple thing as I need to sleep, haven't slept, and I can't hold my tongue anymore. And now I'm lashing out at everybody or saying snappy things. But your coworkers and your friends, it's helpful if they see a change in you just to give you that grace and maybe that heads up that this is not you.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't take that well.
Yeah. I was about to say that requires a lot of self awareness to be able to put yourself aside and go, yeah, they're seeing something that maybe I'm not. So, Nancy, to be able to recognize that in yourself, I think that takes a little extra. Is that something that you put into your training is how to recognize these things in yourself when you're training new nurses?
We absolutely do. We take an intentional body scan break throughout our trainings where we ask people to stop, pause, and ask where they are in a scale of 0 being I'm completely chill to 10 being the most anxious I've been in my life. And so they take a body scan, and we do that throughout the didactic before they go into a simulated exam with a standardized patient, which we intentionally set up to not be a testing situation. It's a mentoring situation with a 3-person teaching team. However, you can still feel nervous when you know people are observing you. So if they are anything more than a 3 or a 4, we take a step back and we do some deep breathing. We integrate a lot of grounding exercises into the work we do, and a lot of them so that it becomes something very comfortable for them to do. I would just like to go back to myself for a minute there. Sorry to be self-centered, but I wanted to add that one of the ways I cope with the heaviness of this work is through research and the work I do with education and standardization of the work we do. For me, it's another way to make an impact that's broader than one patient at a time. It's if I can make the system better, then that is somehow feeding my ability to keep working in this very challenging area professional work.
So, in your professional opinion and all this research that you have done, what's one thing that we're getting right that you're seeing?
Oh my gosh. For one thing, just the volume of people now who are looking more carefully at the work that we do, right? So there are more people doing research in this domain. Do we have enough? No. There's so many things that we still do, and we think they're the best things to do, but we don't really have solid evidence base for them. I mean, some things are going to be impossible and unethical and unfeasible to study, but I think we have a professional journal. We're trying to fill the void of the loss of our primary professional organization. There are state coalitions, for example, in Texas, we just started one. We're trying to just ensure that the level, the quality of the work we do, the support, professional support is there. So I think we are getting those things right. We are moving the science, the evidence based practice forward and taking care of ourselves to promote that retention and provider well being is also something I'm really glad we are doing.
Me too. Me too. I want to ask you guys a couple of things. Each of you something a little bit different. So, Stacy, if there was a forensic nurse that was going to start tomorrow, what would you want them to know?
I think I would want them to know that they are here to make a difference and to create positives out of negatives. And it's about healing and not about justice. And you're not going to save the world. And I think that's the problem with some people is they think they're going to save people. You're not saving anyone. You're giving them tools. They save themselves. And it's not about us. It's about that child, that adult, that parent. It's about them and being able to give them what they need.
You're spot on with that. It's really not about us. It's really not. Um, and a challenge for me has been to I can keep it in mind that it's not about me. That's not the challenge. The challenge is I'm going to shelf this and I'm going to get back to it later and then I'm going to process it. But like some of you said earlier, you just kind of shelf it and I'm like, well, I feel fine. I don't need to go back and get it. Well, yeah, because it's up there on the shelf, but my body will let me know something different eventually. And that's kind of what happens. So I appreciate that perspective so much. From a leadership perspective, what do you think that nurses need that they are not getting? And I was going to direct that to Nancy.
Well, I hope that everyone is being prepared for this profession the way that we are trying to prepare them in our program, but I'm not sure that's the case. I think there are still programs that are prosecution focused, that are forensic first, capital F, small n, and it really needs to be nursing first and healthcare first and well being for everybody in that room first. So I hope that that is continuing to move that direction, but I don't think it's universal at this time.
Yeah, I would agree. That's very powerful. And Rachel, what is something that you hope that patients will believe after they meet a forensic nurse?
Yeah, that's a great question. I want every patient that enters my exam room to know that they're believed. If I cannot change anything about their circumstances or help them in any other way, I hope they leave my care knowing that I believe them. I feel like that is an incredible challenge for survivors, and we hear it across the lifespan from children who, especially in their later years, will say, my mom never believed me. I've even had children come into my care and I'll ask, what brought you here to see me today? And they'll say, well, my mom is here to find out if I'm lying or telling the truth. Um, and, that breaks my heart. So, to that child, I said, well, I know you're telling me the truth. I believe you. I believe what you have to say. And I hope even the adults in my care feel that too. I feel like there's still a huge stigma and victim blaming type culture um, that we encounter in our culture at large. And that leaves a lot of patients not feeling believed. And I think a lot of challenges they face healing stem from that. So if a patient in my care can leave knowing that they're believed and um, that I can support them in that way, that's where I want to always start.
That's amazing. And thank you for doing the work that you do, all three of you. I feel like there's so many ways this conversation can go. And what I really wanted to focus on today was just that people would hear the heart of some forensic nurses of what it is and what it isn't, and maybe spark a little more interest. And maybe it will offer somebody the opportunity to have a little more compassion, a little bit more understanding about what what it is that we do and what it is we don't do, and maybe even give um, survivors an understanding of, it's okay to get help. And there is a little bit of misconception when I talk with people. They don't really understand when they should come in for these types of exams and how what that looks like. Would one of you like to explain kind of how that works, when you should come in and how that goes?
Well, I think it's different for each person. If they're not, sometimes they just need sleep. That's the best thing for them is to get some sleep. But I think as soon as they can is the best time because there are many times we can offer them medications to prevent things. We can look, part of what we do is the assessment and medically assessing and medically treating injuries and infections. And so that's best to be taken care of whenever you can. But you also have to be able to have the space to do that. If you need sleep, you need to do that first, and that's something we understand.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that that there is, I think, a misunderstanding about what this exam is, and partially because the TV shows that it is primarily a forensic exam. I think the public thinks that as well. And we would like people to know this is about you. This is about your health, your physical health, your mental health. Most of what we do is addressing your immediate and potentially longer term health needs during this visit. Unfortunately, about 80% of people who experience sexual assault do not get a medical forensic exam. And a lot of it is because they don't know that this is available. They don't have to report to law enforcement to get one. They don't have to pay for it. It's going to address their medical and health needs.
Yeah, you just nailed my exact next point, was that you don't have to report. There are times where I've had experiences with people, not necessarily patients, but just in the work that I do and having these conversations, like we'll have a conversation and somebody later will realize, I didn't realize what happened to me was assault. And it's been, 6 months, a year, 10 years, 20 years. And they're coming to this realization of, oh, I did not give consent or I was coerced. And that's a whole nother education topic to go on. But in those particular moments, a forensic exam isn't indicated, but you can still receive the advocacy services and get the counseling. You get pointed into the right direction. I just wanted to make sure I hit that for anybody listening that maybe um, didn't know that. That was a huge realization, as I started having these conversations with people, and like, what do I do now that I realized that this is a thing? And same even maybe for a forensic nurse, that something came up for them that they weren't anticipating in doing this work. So there's always hope, always help, always answers. You just have to kind of open your eyes and look for them. And I think that you you three are bringing quite a light into the world, and I'm honored that you came and talked on our podcast today about being a sacred witness and breaking the silence of what, keeps people trapped. And so by doing the work that you do, you are every day being a sacred witness. And I just so appreciate you all for sharing your time. And before we go, I would love to just take a moment and just release what is not ours to carry. So we take a big deep breath and hold our palms up. And then as we blow it out, we push them up to the sky and just let it go. Thank you all for joining me today. I really, really hope that we can have more conversations like this in the future.
Thank you so much, Val.
Thank you for joining us today to listen to this conversation. It was a big one. Whether you're a survivor, a healthcare professional, a first responder, a caregiver, or just someone who simply wanted to understand this work a little bit better, I hope that something you heard today reminded you that compassion still exists and that there are people quietly showing up every day to bear witness to some of life's hardest moments. As always, I hope you took what you needed and left the rest. Not every story belongs to us. Sometimes the most healing thing we can do is simply witness it with an open heart, learn something new, and allow it to deepen our understanding of one another. So if this conversation brought up something tender for you, I do encourage you to please reach out to somebody that you trust, a friend, an advocate, a counselor, another safe person. You do not have to carry this alone. Thank you for spending time with us and for helping us defy silence that keeps us isolated. Until next time, take real good care of yourself, be gentle with one another, and remember you are worthy of being seen, heard, and believed.